My name is Affaf Noor. I'm one of the expert tutors for the Audit and Assurance stream of papers. The video you're about to watch is on internal audit. We're going to look at how this topic is tested in the AA exam in section A and section B. We will talk about how you can prepare for this topic, and we are going to revise a few key concepts through examples as well. The key outcome of this video should be that you'd be more comfortable with your preparation and the subsequent testing in the actual exam. We'll start off with a checklist of topics that you should be comfortable with. I'll also direct you to the relevant resources on ACCA's Study Hub, which can be used to prepare internal audit. We'll then discuss the common reasons for not being able to attempt these questions well in the exams, and I'll show you examples of how this topic has been commonly tested in the past. But the main focus will be on revising key concepts related to the work of internal auditors, the benefits they can bring to an organization, and how external auditors can rely on the work of the client's internal audit function. So let's just jump right into it. Internal audit technically isn't a very difficult area. However, if you don't understand the work that they do, you're likely to struggle with attempting the questions in the exam. Additionally, and very importantly, there's some learning involved so that you don't take up a lot of time in coming up with an appropriate answer in the exam. I won't go through the content on the screen in detail, but what you see on the screen has been extracted from the syllabus guide, and this will give you a fair idea of the topics that you need to be comfortable with. Now, in summary, the areas that you need to prepare for knowledge-based, straightforward testing, as well as scenario-based testing, are the ones that you see on the screen. Please remember, an internal audit function is not a statutory requirement. You should therefore learn the factors that an organization should normally consider to evaluate the need for internal audit. You should know that the internal audit function can be outsourced or in-house. It should be ideally structured to maintain their independence and quality of work. There is no exhaustive list of tasks or assignments that internal auditors can do, but you should know the common assignments that they may be asked to perform because they come up quite frequently in the exam. You need to be comfortable with discussing the limitations of internal audit for a given client. Like I said earlier, and this is something you might already be comfortable with, the internal audit function can either be in-house or outsourced to a service provider. You should therefore learn the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing internal audit. Although this isn't tested a lot, you would need to be comfortable with how internal auditors report on their work, so the format and the content of their reports. And finally, not only should you be clear on the differences between external and internal auditors, it's important to understand that as a part of external audit, if auditors want to rely on the work of the internal audit function, you should know the factors they need to evaluate before they can do so. So a summary of the topics that you need to be comfortable with. Now, just to make your life easier, ACCA has everything sorted out for you. We know there's quite a bit of content that needs to be prepared. You can actually do this preparation from chapter 14 of the Study Hub. You can see on the screen that this covers all the syllabus areas so that you can actually ensure and use this as a checklist to make sure nothing is left out. Additionally, please don't forget to practice question on the practice platform to ensure that you understand how this topic has been tested in the past exam in audit and assurance. Now, internal control questions often include a knowledge requirement. So this is question in section B on your systems of internal control, and they are relatively straightforward marks where you can actually score maximum marks. And quite often, either as a part of internal control or corporate governance or a separate question, your examiner expects you to have a discussion on internal audit. However, the examiner reports have repeatedly said that this is not an area that students do well in. So lack of knowledge is one of the reasons that you might struggle with questions on internal audit. This is therefore also linked to the second reason, which is the inability to apply that knowledge to objective text questions in section A, as well as your long form questions in section B. It is imperative that you give adequate time to learning the knowledge areas of the syllabus, particularly internal audit. Having said that, the rest of the video will help in ensuring that both of these reasons do not apply to you. I'm sure all of you know this already, but just to reiterate, section B of the audit and assurance exam is where you have the long form questions that you have to type up the answer to. The examiners often expect you to discuss the pros and cons of outsourcing internal audit. This is an easy topic that you need to basically learn. You may also be asked to discuss the reasons for and against a client in the scenario having an internal audit department. We'll be covering this in the video. Although this is primarily learning based, you can also be asked to discuss the trigger factors that may affect the need of a company having an internal audit function. So, for example, if the company has grown in size recently, or there have been repeated internal control failures or frauds, they could actually benefit from having this function, which could then monitor the controls that are in place. You can also be asked to describe assignments the internal auditors can carry out. We will revise some of these commonly tested assignments in this video. So for example, if a company has recently started selling online or just ventured into e-commerce, an assignment the internal audit function can actually carry out is an IT audit. Please remember, although it says section B over here, these are the same topics that can be tested in section A through mini scenarios as well. We will now look at a few key concepts which will help you attempt questions in both section A and section B. Now, let's begin with understanding what internal audit actually is in the simplest of terms. Remember, external auditors only give an opinion on the year-end financial statements. Internal auditors, on the other hand, serve as a monitoring mechanism rather than a checking one. They evaluate how the organization carries on its activities. They will give recommendations that add value to the organization. So, for example, they can actually help in identifying risks for the management. Remember, it is the management who will then design and implement controls to manage those risks. Internal auditors will evaluate those controls to see if they are designed well and operating properly. Internal auditors can also review compliance with external laws and regulations so that chances of breaches are reduced. Remember, non-compliance or a breach is going to cost money. It can also negatively impact the organization's reputation. So this element of monitoring is quite beneficial for the client. Internal auditors can also review the reports that are sent to the board as well as those which are published for external stakeholders. They can therefore help in making sure that the information that is being reported is relevant, reliable, and addresses the needs of the stakeholders. Eventually, all of these tasks and their additional monitoring will help in safeguarding the organization's assets. It's very important to understand that internal auditors would focus on operational issues or systems related to operational concerns along with the money matters or the financial concerns. A few more things, particularly for your objective text questions in section A. As we discussed earlier, and this is something you might already know, internal audit function is not a legal requirement. However, most stock exchanges require their listed companies to have an internal audit function. And if they don't have one, they need to explain why they do not have this function in their annual or integrated reports. Additionally, in companies which do not have an internal audit function, their audit committee should consider every year whether there's a need for this function. Remember, the factors to consider are also a part of the syllabus. Elements like if the risks have changed, the company has grown, the number of employees have increased, etc., need to be considered every year. And we also know that companies may have an in-house department, internal audit department, or they may outsource it to a service organization. In all cases, a few more key concepts to keep in mind. The head of the internal audit function should be a senior, qualified, and experienced individual. The size of internal audit function will vary based on each organization's circumstances, but there should be sufficient number of people with relevant experience to ensure that the function can carry out its tasks or the assignments effectively. The department should work in a well-organized manner, which basically means they need to have a proper plan that they agree with the audit committee. They follow that plan, they document their findings, and then subsequently report to the audit committee. So work needs to be done without any compromise on quality or any intervention from the executive management. Like we said earlier, to make sure that they maintain their objectivity and independence, they should ideally report directly to the audit committee. And if the company does not have one, they should be reporting to the entire board. In a number of questions in the past exams, the internal audit function was reporting to the finance director, and you had to pick that up to say that their independence has been compromised. The scope of their work should be set by the audit committee or the head of internal audit. Scope basically means the work that they're going to do or the assignments that they will actually carry out. So these are the points that you need to keep in mind so that you can actually attempt these questions in section A. We will now look at some assignments which are commonly carried out by internal auditors. Remember, this is not a complete list, just frequently tested examples in the AA exam. Now, in value for money review or audit, internal auditors will evaluate if the resources are being used in an optimal manner. Economy means least cost. Efficiency means the best use of resources. Effectiveness involves evaluating whether the objective of that function has been achieved. So, for example, they can be asked to assess that when the client purchases non-current assets, are they actually getting the best value for money? Now, the term regulatory compliance is quite simple. Auditors will evaluate if the company is complying with the laws and regulations that apply to that particular company. So, for example, if a lot of laws and regulations such as health and safety, environmental laws apply to a client, internal auditors can help in monitoring compliance with these regulations. They would also make sure that there are systems in place to prevent breaches rather than simply detect them and pay the fines. In an IT systems review, internal auditors are basically going to evaluate if the controls on the computerized environment are strong. They can assess the company's technological infrastructure to find any problems with efficiency, risk management, and compliance. For example, they can review whether there are sufficient disaster recovery procedures in place, or maybe to make sure that access to sensitive data is limited to senior authorized officials only. They can look at whether general and information processing controls are designed effectively and operating effectively, etc. Remember, general IT controls are on the overall IT environment, and information processing controls relate to particular applications, and they make sure that the data that is input, processed, and reported is being done correctly. Internal auditors can also be asked to investigate suspected fraud as well as review the controls that are in place to prevent or detect fraud. So for example, if a retailer deals in cash and the goods that they're selling are easily movable, there's a significant risk of theft of inventory as well as cash. Internal auditors can be asked to review the main areas of fraud risk and recommend controls that mitigate or minimize these risks. If fraud is suspected, internal auditors can also be asked to investigate the cases further. So again, these are just a few examples that you should keep in mind in terms of the work that they can do. Just one last example. A mystery shopping review is basically an evaluation of a customer's experience. So the auditors, and this is very interesting, the auditors would actually pretend to be customers to carry out this review. Internal auditors are basically assessing the performance of the customer service staff so that they can identify areas of improvement and monitor the quality of work and compliance with regulations. So along with a routine monitoring of all the controls that are in place, these are some examples of additional assignments that they can be asked to carry out. Now that you've understood what the internal audit function is and what they do, we're going to have a look at a past exam question where some element of scenario linkage is expected. This is not very common, but it has been tested in the past exam, so let's get comfortable with this. I want you to pause the video and read through the scenario carefully. Note down the key points that are relevant to the requirement before you come back and listen to my debrief. So this company provides financial services. It's a family-owned business with 6 shareholders. It is not listed, and probably because it's in the financial services sector, an annual audit is required by law. So in spite of not being a listed company, a statutory audit has to be done. And additional regulation is expected in the near future, which will apply to them. Now, auditors use online real-time computer systems, which need to be really good for them so that they can actually give up-to-date advice to their clients. Their accounting system is fairly simple. They have revenues based on fee generated from investment advice and expenditure, which is mainly fixed. They do not have a sound system of internal control as they believe in trusting their staff, and they are more concerned with minimizing costs and making profits than implementing detailed controls. 4 of the shareholders are board members, and 1 person is the chairman as well as the CEO, and the financial accountant has been working with them for quite some time but is not professionally qualified. The requirement is that you have to discuss the reasons for and against having an internal audit department in this particular client, which was named in, of course, the question as well. Now, please remember, a generic discussion might not be enough to get passing marks in this question because there are lots of indications given that you can pick up some scenario linked points as well. Something similar could actually be tested in section A. So this could be given as background information, and you may be asked to evaluate this information in terms of whether this company could benefit from an internal audit function. Now, even if you haven't learned anything yet, purely from the knowledge that you have gained from this video, you should be able to come up with a fairly good answer. Let's start with the benefits that the company can actually get if they do establish an internal audit function. As they are already regulated, plus they have additional regulations coming up, internal auditors can help ensure compliance with regulations. We discussed this earlier. The company uses complex stock market monitoring systems. Internal auditors can offer value for money services or review potential upgrades in order to ensure that their clients are given services at the best value without compromising on quality. So value for money services, I'm going to talk about IT separately in just a second. As their systems are automated, maintenance of these computer systems is going to be critical for the business. Internal auditors can review the effectiveness of backup and disaster recovery arrangements, for example. So they can make sure that the IT controls that need to be there are actually designed well and operating effectively. Being a family-owned business, they do not have many internal controls at the moment. Internal auditors can recommend cost-effective additional controls to manage key risks. Cost-effective being the key word, because please remember, this is a family-owned business who wants to aim at maximizing their profit. So don't recommend fancy controls. You could actually offer cost-effective controls as well. As external audit is a legal requirement for this company, they may be able to negotiate a decrease in the external audit fee if external auditors can place reliance on the work of internal auditors. As a part of the video, we're going to take up this last benefit again towards the end. A few more benefits. Having a well-established internal audit function can actually help in an improved image. The customers would be happy, as good controls imply their money is safe. Remember, corporate governance guidelines are based on best practices. Internal auditors can recommend policies for good corporate governance. For example, they could suggest that the chairman and CEO should be split, the roles should be split, so that one person does not have too much power. As the financial accountant is not professionally qualified, internal auditors can help in compliance with financial reporting standards and recommend better financial controls over the reporting process. The staff is going to be producing financial reports for their board. Internal auditors can improve the accuracy and reliability of these reports, as they would be reviewing the reports to make sure the information that is being reported has integrity. And so the entire process can actually be reviewed, the reporting process. And finally, internal auditors can carry out risk assessments on the portfolios being recommended to the clients. This will ensure that the portfolio matches the customer's risk profile as well as the company's own risk appetite as well. So because they're of course dealing with their customers' money, they could actually do a more technical risk assessment as well. You can see very obviously with so many advantages that we're quite biased, and we've discussed lots of benefits, but there are certain challenges or cons, so to say, that need to be looked at as well, mainly because they're a part of the requirement. So there are a number of arguments that can be made to discuss that an internal audit function for this company in particular may not be quite beneficial or may have challenges that need to be managed. For example, there's no legal requirement for them to have an internal audit function, because of which the directors may see it as a waste of time and money, and therefore they may not be open to the idea of establishing this department. We also know their accounting systems do not really have very complex elements, so the directors may not see the need for another department to review their operations and check the integrity of reporting, etc. This is a family-owned business with no external shareholders, so there's no need to provide assurance to other shareholders on the effectiveness of controls and accuracy of accounting systems. So they might not really agree to internal auditors adding value. We also know that the directors are primarily focused on profit and they trust their employees. The additional cost of having this department may not be an attractive option for them. And finally, directors and the senior staff, particularly the unqualified financial accountant, may feel challenged by an internal audit function because they'll be reviewing their work. So you can see that we picked up information from this scenario and we linked it to the knowledge we had, just making sure we're just putting it all together. The last topic that we're going to revise in this video is from the external auditor's perspective. So we are now talking about international standards on auditing, ISAs. Remember, internal control systems over financial reporting are tested by external auditors because they want to decide on the extent of substantive testings. So the same systems that external auditors test once a year are the ones that internal auditors have been tested throughout. So external auditors may be able to use the work of internal auditors, but based on the requirements of auditing standards, there are certain factors that need to be considered before that is done. This comes under relying on work of others, and these are very easy knowledge-based marks in your AA exam. Now, to start off with, the objectivity and independence of the internal audit function needs to be looked at. External auditors need to consider if the internal audit function is independent, particularly independent from the finance department. Additionally, they should consider who they report to. Like we discussed earlier, internal auditors should ideally report to the audit committee or the entire board. Although there is no requirement for internal auditors to be professionally qualified accountants, the technical competence of the internal audit staff should be considered, the head of this department in particular. If they are members of a professional body and have relevant qualifications and experience, their work should be considered more reliable. In order to place reliance, there needs to be effective communication between internal and external auditors. This is most likely to occur when the two departments are free to communicate with each other and they communicate openly with regular meetings held throughout the year. External auditors should also consider if internal auditors have exercised proper due professional care in doing their work. This would involve looking at whether the work was properly planned with detailed work programs. Was the work properly supervised, documented, and reviewed? Please remember, this is mainly a knowledge-based topic that you can pretty much prepare from this video, and this will get you all the available marks in a AA exam. Just to wrap up, internal audit is one of the easier topics in audit and assurance. So please do ensure that you focus on what we have discussed in this video, particularly the knowledge checklist of areas that you need to be comfortable with before you take the final AA exam.